Hi everyone, I'm here with Chris McEleavey, who's a founding partner at Bulien, and Bulien are a data company or a data, and they do a lot of work in data analytics as well. So Chris, very welcome, and thanks very much for joining me today.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me.
So we were chatting a bit earlier around, I suppose, data and sort of your kind of sweet spot in terms of data and data analytics. And obviously, we've been through the pandemic, and we've seen a lot of sort of digital systems being put in as a result of that. I mean, sort of, how have you sort of seen that evolve over the last sort of 12 months or so? I mean, has there been a sea change between where we were before and where we are now?
Absolutely. I would say 100% yes, for many different reasons. And some of these things have come across because a lot of the larger companies especially were caught out by this. The smaller companies found it a little bit easier to adjust, I think, or the newer companies, because they were more agile, they were, it was easy to pivot. But I think a lot of companies, I do have first-hand experience of a few who were caught out simply because, for instance, they didn't have the capability to allow their employees to work from home. They just didn't have that setup. They didn't have the infrastructure in place. And this was a wake-up call for them in that regard. Obviously, with that being extended for a prolonged period of time, they've then realized that, the new normal might not be exact as what we're talking. There will be a kind of a change back to what it was, but it'll never be the same. Yeah. So they've now got this infrastructure in place. They've realized people can work remotely, and so there is a bit of a change there. But also the other side of it was things like the analytics side of things, where they realized they just didn't have the information they needed to operate under the new circumstances as well. So we've seen companies realizing that, wow, we need to be looking at our data more. We need to be making more data-driven decisions. And they've taken this opportunity over the last year or so to actually move ahead with that as well. So we've seen a lot of change.
And how much do you think it's going to be around companies have got the data and they just didn't use it versus companies didn't have the data and now they're putting in digital systems to actually use it?
I think there's a bit of both, but I think overwhelmingly companies have data. And of course, one of the things I get asked quite a lot is, the platforms we offer, what vertical is it for? Is it for the public sector? Is it for retail? The answer is anyone with data. And I don't know a company that doesn't have an abundance of data. And I've said this like a number of times, data should be on your balance sheet, and people don't know the information in their data. That's what we do.
The digital systems, we've seen like a massive implementation of digital systems. They sort of, as we've gone through the pandemic, and there's sort of like everyone's been putting digital experience in, etc., as they sort of spit out data as well. So once they put in, they sort of spit out data, and you can then use that data to do things. I mean, what are some of the innovative use cases you think that sort of like a sort of point now where people are sort of looking to try and generate customer improvements in customer experience or better outcomes? I mean, what have been some of the themes?
I mean, it really runs the gamut. I mean, obviously we've been doing a lot of work with the public sector, the NHS, and they have a very different drive to another area that we do a lot of, which is online retail. They have different drivers, but one thing that they're starting to realize is that, for instance, an online retailer is losing customers, and we ask why, and up to now it's a case of we'll go and talk to the salesman or the account manager for that particular customer, and we'll find out why. And of course, that's just a hunch. So the fact is that we have so much data, you can't be doing those hunch-driven decision-making things anymore because it's not accurate. So what we've found is things like churn analytics. Why are we losing customers? Why are we gaining customers all of a sudden? All of these kind of things. If you're not set up to trade online in 2021, you're not really going to survive very long if you're in retail. We are seeing a big shift in the public sector. Generally speaking, are quite a way behind the public sector, the private sector, and that still is true. But they're really starting to push forward and understand it because they have masses of data and they need to be making better decisions based on that. Now, traditionally, what we're seeing is large companies with large data using Excel or SQL. And of course, this just isn't fit for purpose. It's not 1996. We've moved on a long way from there. We can't be saying can you get me that answer next month? I mean, that's just gone. I'm sorry. We need it in the next 10 minutes. That's what today is. But the use cases, I mean, I've been in this game for a long time, and the use cases now are coming up that are just popping up like bubbles everywhere, all the different things, and I'm just sort of going with the flow. But yeah, it absolutely runs the gamut. We built things for sports analytics, where they're looking at injuries in professional sportsmen and women, all the way through to how long are you likely to wait in A&E in a hospital.
There's a sea of data that's out there. I mean, there's huge amounts of data that's out there, and you need to try and find the answers to something in there. And it's not just a matter of like, let's just bring the ocean in and then out will pop the result. How do you approach that? I mean, is it the use cases that sort of drive where the analytics are? What are you sort of seeing in terms of like what's driving the analytics and what's driving the methodologies and almost like the problems you're trying to solve for?
Yeah, well, you've hit the nail on the head. The simple fact is that traditionally, if you go back to the 90s, the amount of data that was floating about is generated hourly now. That existed in the entire world in 1995, generated by the hour now. It's ludicrous. So primates are not equipped to go and look at this kind of, this level of information. So, you're seeing the rise of AI, machine learning, these kind of things, and the platforms we use can actually bring in masses of data and filter out and looking for signal within the noise. But what we're also seeing is companies that 5 years ago were saying, well, that's just science fiction. We're nowhere near that. We don't have the staff who can do that. All of those things are untrue. First of all, absolutely untrue. Kids that are coming out of university now are equipped far better than we were. Absolutely. I mean, they're way ahead of where I am. I'm just lost in the sea of sorcery. It's great. I love it. But they're all coming through and they're wanting to say, well, why don't we do this? Why don't we do this? But we find that we go into a company that has traditionally been using Excel, and you have a bit of resistance, people who are still stuck in Excel and that kind of thing. You show them the new platforms and it's like, wow, okay, so that thing that I do once a month because of the time restraints in Excel, I can automate that and it runs in 12 seconds. What else can I do? And those are the people that start taking it on. Now, when it comes to the use cases, they know their data better than I ever will. But once I get them up and running with this, then they start off and running. And that's what we want to see. And they're answering questions that they never bothered even asking before because it just wasn't worth asking the question. And now they're getting it all out. And this is why I was saying this, it's all about pulling the information from the data. And you need to use things like machine learning simply because of the data sizes we're talking about and what's being generated daily.
But it's quite interesting. We talk about machine learning, we talk about AI, we talk about all these statistical techniques and data lakes and those kind of things. But at the end of the day, there's also that human element involved in terms of like, well, where do you point the huge processing power you've got to basically find it? So you sort of the human's still involved to then work out, well, how do I interpret it, right?
100%. I mean, AI does what the human tells it to do. This is where people have they hear AI and machine learning and they think the Terminator, our cash machines are going to take over the world. Of course not. It's completely guided by what we decide. We ask it a question and it learns from the information we give it, and it says, based on all of the things you've told me, this is what we predict will happen. It's not sorcery and it's not machines taking over the world. It's completely controlled and governed, and we make decisions based on all it is statistical analysis and statistical facts. So then the human makes the decisions. But also the human is building that AI. I mean, I don't need to understand machine learning algorithms. I've got smarter people who understand that. I just need to understand what it's doing and the answers that I'm getting, and then I can go and make a business decision based upon that output. But you can't do that in Excel. First of all, it's manual. You've got to do the manual if statements and things, and you have to impose upon it what you think is linked. What ML algorithms are doing in businesses to say, if this occurs, this is likely to occur, just on a massively complex and grand scale. But without the human, it's utterly meaningless. And a lot of the platforms we do, they go out and you show it to a data scientist, and you can see that, first of all, the blood drains from their face, and they think, well, I'm going to lose my job. No one has ever lost, no data scientist has lost their job for what we do. More have been hired. The simple fact is that these are tools for data scientists and analysts, and there is a massive shortage of competent data analysts and data scientists, and always will be. You're never going to complete data science. What we need to do is make those people more efficient. So we need to give them the tools so they're not spending time cleansing data and doing all of the sort of stuff that can be done automated in a machine. We need them to be interpreting and analyzing data. That's what they're for.
How much specialist knowledge do you think there is in that in terms of like business specific knowledge? So if you're going in and you're doing analytics, how much do you rely on people who really understand the businesses and understand the dynamics versus you can just pull out almost like mathematically in terms of relationships?
It's 90% human. Simply because I can come in and just take out 90% of their work in terms of, and then of what they're currently doing, and then they go and, well, there's all the other stuff that they need to do now, which they can do in the same amount of time. But the simple fact is, like I said, when I go in, it's letters and numbers. That's what your data is, letters and numbers, including images, including sound. It all gets converted to letters and numbers. They need to interpret it, and they need to understand what it is. Because if I go into your business and I see a column that says 243 million, That's a number to me, but to you, that might be a sales revenue per quarter. It might be whatever, I don't know. So it's meaningless without the human. It's just letters and numbers. But also I need to know what is important and impactful to the business. I don't particularly need to know, the person does. And this is why it's always going to be driven by the human.
The maths and the tools and the techniques means you can then take on more complexity, right? So you start to think about the extra complexity, right? In terms of like other variables, how they interact with each other, those kind of things.
That's exactly it. And that's what it's doing. It's just empowering the human. It's just giving we're having the same conversations now about people losing their job as when they invented the desktop calculator. Yeah. Did that result in people losing? Of course not. Did Excel, the same conversations with Excel, did that result in mass job losses? Of course not. I don't know, the cotton gin, the same thing. I mean, this is just always happened throughout history. This is just a new revolution. This is a digital revolution that we're going through at the moment, and we're just starting out. But one thing that this is doing, the tools that we're using, that it's the last 10 years, it's already traditional. The data scientist would be a bottleneck, because in this organization of 30,000 people, we've got 2 people who are capable of doing this. The tools now say anyone who has business knowledge and a bit of knowledge of data can now do what those people are doing. So now, instead of a bottleneck of Elizabeth and Kevin in a 28,000 workforce, we now have 5,000 people who can do this job. That is the democratization of data across the organization, and therefore the efficiencies are just skyrocketing. I'm still going out and looking at places, and that you've got a team of 10 people who are sitting doing things in Excel. And those people really need to start looking at the new dynamic and these new things, because I can automate everything they're doing. And it would take me a week to automate everything they're doing, and then they're gone if they're not going to move on. However, the knowledge these people have and the skills these people have, if they take on the new platforms, they're going to be experts in these platforms, and they're going to be doing 100 times what they were doing the week before. And that's what's exciting. And that's what we're finding 99% of companies are doing. That's what's happening. That's where they're moving.
Let's have a sidebar on Excel, because I do think Excel is like the cotton gin. That's just like you said.
Yes.
I think it has been revolutionary. I mean, spreadsheets actually generally have been revolutionary, and the fact that you can build models on Excel is a testament to just like how wonderful they've been. Now, whether they're the perfect tool to do everything is something else, but they have been revolutionary over the last 10, 20 years. I do think, but maybe it's time to move on. Maybe it's time you don't use the bicycle's wonderful, but you don't use it to travel to Durham or to Durham to Edinburgh, right?
Great analogy. It's a great analogy. You also don't use the penny farthing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, the gramophone was revolutionary. But I have Spotify. Yeah. It's the same thing. It's just things that are done better. Excel was one of the best things ever written. It's just been horrendously used, and I don't blame the people who do it. Actually, it's some of them I do, because they're just stuck and they don't see the future. But the tools that came out earlier were the trailblazers. We wouldn't be doing what we're doing now without Excel. It was that revolutionary. It was incredible. But you mentioned the cotton gin. I mean, we don't use that anymore, I assume. I'm not an expert in textiles, but this is, it's a natural revolution and progression. But yeah, I mean, we're now on the verge of losing, and hopefully losing, the internal combustion engine. So, we're getting rid of diesel and petrol burning motors, and that I hopefully will live to see the end of that. And it's the same thing. It's just a natural progression. But yes, I totally agree with you. Excel has been, in its day, was an absolutely amazing and mind-blowing piece of kit.
And when you talk about like some of the new things that are out there, and I know we were chatting about some of the modeling stuff and the data manipulation stuff that you guys have been looking at. What's the state of the art, and where are we going to? Because you used to churn the handle and you used to write the codes and statistical programs sitting in the back. But I mean, there's new things coming out with, like, there's new technology, there's new extra processing power. You can sort of there's new algorithms that you can now use. I mean, where does it go next?
Well, we're using, so the platforms that we have are cutting edge, and they're exactly for that reason. So again, the traditional data scientist would be sitting there coding an algorithm, writing the whole thing, the ETL process, the whole data blending and connectivity. They'll be writing it in code. We use code-free platforms that do exactly those things. So everyone can do it. You don't need the ability to code in any language at all, really. Drag and drop, and everything can be done. Then, so there are 3 stages of analytics, really. And the first stage is where 99% of all companies globally currently are, which is what happened. So that is, we're just reporting business intelligence tools, Excel, these things. We're reporting on what happened, and we're visualizing the data to say this occurred in the past, this is what happened, this is where we are. Then you have descriptive analytics. The next step is predictive. So a lot of them, the cutting edge companies are moving into the predictive section. And that is where we're looking at the kind of machine learning tools. And a lot of them are doing that in the traditional manner. The tools we're now using, particularly Data Robot and Alteryx, they give us the ability to put data in and say, predict that. And it will then choose, using machine learning, what algorithms are best suited to your data types, what you have in your data. And it will then start churning, testing against itself, retesting, changing the parameters. And it'll do this automatically. Things that I'm incapable of doing, so I'm not a data scientist, I can now do. So all of this will automatically choose the best algorithm, train it for me automatically. And I can just feed the data and say, predict that, and it's done. And the results we get with that, obviously, we're more than happy to go up against, well, we do hackathons, we do that kind of thing, and we're consistently right at the top of these things. Then, of course, the next step from that is prescriptive analytics. Now we know what we think is going, well, we have a good idea of what's going to happen in the future. What do we do about it? And this is kind of optimization analytics. And very few people are at that point yet. We have the tools to do this, but to everyone we show, it's just witchcraft.
And where would you say that, the existing businesses, I suppose, where businesses today fits across those four characteristics? I mean, because you've got some sort of, much more traditional kind of businesses. Often they've been around a long time, and they might sit at one end, and then you've got these new sort of like either neobanks, or you've got new fintechs, or you've got new sort of like social media, or some of the tech companies. Where does it sort of sit on that continuum?
That's interesting. So, like I said, I think I said to you earlier, was the older, more traditional leviathans that we have of these huge companies that have 100,000 people working for them, and they've had to put rigid regimes and structures in place. They find it very difficult. So we have major financial organizations globally who are just operating in Excel. They're backing things up on magnetic tape. These are institutions that are just so slow moving. You mentioned neobanks. Neobanks, I think, are incredibly important. And the other day we spoke about these. They have kind of dipped their toe into the future. These organizations are setting out with a base level set upon the new regime, the new way of looking at things. Those, I think, are going to be driving it. It's just as we've identified, the problem is the funding. So they either get to a point where, they're pushing the boundaries here, and then a big bank just buys them out to shut them up, or they just can't compete because of the funding. And the bigger banks just continue doing what they're doing. I'm not naming any names there, but we are starting to see some of the bigger organizations taking on this machine learning and getting rid of the predictive models that were written in the 70s that's still being used. We're starting to see it move. But what's really exciting for me is these small, agile, sub 100 people kind of companies who are starting out from day one, building on machine learning analytics. And it's very exciting to see. I think if you don't move on, if you sit and rest on your laurels because you're big and these guys are small, that's not going to be the case all the time.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see how things how things sort of expand. I mean, there's so much data out there. The question is just really whether are we using enough of it? Do you think there's been a change in even AI, right? So AI has been it's been bandied around a lot, I would suppose, over the last sort of like 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And to a certain extent, these are statistical tools that were, a lot of them were developed in the 70s, right? The 70s and the 80s, right? Do you think we're sort of almost like reaching peak AI, but now there's a realization around what it actually is, and now we're actually getting to the execution stage?
I think we're just dipping our toe into the execution stage. This is the start of the AI revolution. We are right at sort of grassroots level here. AI itself hasn't changed. It's still the same thing. It's just a collection of algorithms that are calculating certain patterns. But we have an increase in, as you mentioned, the processing power, the increase in data size, which allows us to crunch more data. So it's just becoming more sophisticated. It's a more sophisticated version of the same thing, in the same way that what we're doing now is a more sophisticated version of Excel, because we just have this power to be able to do this, and we're moving forward with it. But the amount of data that's being generated now, it's just exponential, the amount of data. And the fact is that 99.9% of it is just noise. The problem is that we didn't have the processing power to be able to find the signal lost in that noise, and now we do, and we're developing that. So it's becoming more sophisticated. It's the same thing, just going up. So we're just at the infant stage.
When you're on the ground, sort of talking with clients, do you think there's a greater maturity around understanding around data and what it is versus maybe even what there was even 5 years ago? Is that kind of evolving?
Yes. 5 years ago, AI, machine learning was just witchcraft and sorcery. And of course, it was just a fad. Of course, it was never going to catch on. And you get a lot of them now are saying, so tell me more about this AI thing. It's maybe not an increase, it's an improvement in awareness of it, but maybe not the knowledge of it. So there is still a lot of fear and hesitation around it because they do think it's this magical black box thing. It's just mathematics. Now, obviously, it's mathematics that a chimp like me can't understand, but I don't really need to because I've got the tools that much smarter people than I have written. And that's the thing. And I can now go out and talk AI, ML, and I can understand what it's doing, and I can understand the impact it's going to have, and I can talk to leaders of businesses who are doing this, and they then understand the way I'm approaching it. Because if I put a data scientist in front of them, they're not going to understand a word they say. Neither am I. So there's a lot more awareness. But I think it's instead the I can't become a data scientist thing is now going away when they're seeing that the tools that are on the market can help them become that data scientist. Yeah.
But I suppose some of it needs to be, I need to have a solution, and this is how I can get to, this is how I can use those tools to get to a solution as much as I understand the math to do it.
Well, that's ultimately what it's all about. And on the flip side, when we talk to data scientists, and obviously I employ some, they why do we do data science? And you get an answer back to write the best algorithm, to make the best predictions. And the answer is no. No to that, no to that. Oh, to make this model more accurate? No. To build a model, get it into production? No. The reason we do data science is to improve revenue, to improve profit, to decrease cost, to decrease time. That's why we do it. Otherwise, it's just utterly pointless. It's just a hobby. So it's understanding, and that's the new wave of data scientists are business users rather than data scientists who sit in a darkened room and do maths that no one can understand. We now have citizen data scientists who are business minded and business driven and are using these tools to make business decisions.
You talked a bit about data and the volume of data we have. So I was watching a documentary. It was a science documentary, and it's like, just think about how we've gone from, you remember like kilobytes? Remember kilobytes used to have, like talk about how many K it was. And then we had megabytes. Then we had gigabytes. Now you might get a terabyte, and they were talking in terms of petabytes and sort of like, I mean, it's in zettabytes it's going to be, isn't it? And the amount of processing power and the data there is just huge. And they were trying to find signals in the noise exactly the same. So it's almost like the conversation is moving on, and we're sort of going up the scale almost like every couple of years. We seem like we're going up the scale. I mean, do you think that kind of level of data is going to come into business?
Yes, I think it already is. Certainly with some of the larger businesses, we actually work with a few who are dealing, in petabytes of data, and they need to be able to get the noise, get the signal from the noise in that. But yeah, that exponential growth. I'm going to get this completely wrong, but there was something like the data that existed in the world in 2010 is now generated every day. It was something like that. So this is an exponential increase. And I remember Bill Gates said something along the lines of, you'll never need more than 1 megabyte of RAM in a PC. Something ludicrous to that effect. So yeah, it's this exponential growth. Year on year, if you were to then look at that growth of data, it is absolutely vast. And that's why AI is moving along, because the processing power is moving along. So the AI is able to do, without much change to what it's actually doing at its core, it's sitting on more powerful platforms that are available to more and more people, which means that you can crunch more and more of this data. But the size of the data that's existing in some of these companies, that they previously have just thought, well, that most of that is useless, but they don't actually know that. They just haven't had the power to look into it. And we're now starting to unlock that with these tools. Then we're going to get some interesting decisions made.
And particularly the relationship of this plus this plus this, and then this and this and this and this and this can be really sort of predictive, right? And once you start joining things together, which is, I suppose, what we do as humans quite a lot, but it's just being able to do it on a vast scale.
We do it without knowing it. The calculations that go on the human brain, but are vast and incredibly complex. But yeah, we don't realize we're doing it, even in my brain. So that's something we do every day. How to pick up a cup of coffee is just incredibly complex. But yeah, when it comes to business decisions, when it comes to business calculations, exactly what you said there. Let's put in most of the viewers here will be familiar with Excel, so we'll put it into that term. Let's say you had an Excel spreadsheet with a couple of petabytes of data and 200,000 columns. Which columns are related to the outcome of column A? We can't do that. We can't do that calculation. But machine learning can.
The fact we've got so much extra processing power, and I'm going back to to the days of the ZX Spectrum and
yes.
and VIC-20, because I had a conversation about that the other day. I mean, do you think coding had to be really super efficient? And we used to spend an awful lot of time trying to get coding as efficiently as possible.
Mm-hmm.
The fact we've got access to all this extra data, access to extra processing power, do you think the coding's become less efficient because we don't have to be?
So yes, it very much matters. We use code-free platforms, which actually provide like batches of code that interlink to each other. Yes, it matters simply because, as we've discussed, yes, the processing power has gone up, but so has the data. And it really does matter. Ultimately, if you have a data set that runs in a decent amount of time and you get your answer, then maybe not. But I would always say yes, because we have to future-proof this against exponential data growth. Has it got any better and more efficient? Sometimes.
Maybe when we get all that, when you get all those is it petabytes of data or petabytes of data, that's when it sort of drives the efficiency, because there's a need, isn't there?
Exactly, and I think certainly with the platforms we use, it's geared towards doing that. So absolutely yes, but of course there's always a human involved, and some do it more efficiently than others. It's an interesting question. Has it become more efficient because the need has decreased? The need has decreased on a more day-to-day basis. Where back in the day, you mentioned the ZX Spectrum and things, and I remember BASIC back in like things like the Acorn Electron. You didn't have any margin for error. You're dealing in 8 kilobytes. You had no margin for error, so it just simply had to be, or it didn't run. It wasn't a run slowly thing. It just didn't work. So yeah, I probably I think that you've got a little bit. You can go outside of the lines a bit more, I think now.
Yeah, it's a little bit more, maybe more forgiving.
More forgiving, yes.
So you still have to get it right, though, I suppose. But
yeah, and the when you're looking at things, I often say with the platforms we use, when someone's sizing a server, how much RAM do we need? My answer is yes.
Yeah, lots.
So just because it's so cheap, it's not really worth having the conversation about. You know, so, oh, well, this is the minimum spec. This is what. No, just look. It's 100 quid for another whatever 64 gig of RAM or whatever. Just put it in. Who cares? Just throw RAM at it.
So we're on this terrific arc in terms of like data capture, processing power. I mean, where do you see it going from here? I mean, what's the next step for us?
An obvious one for me, and this sounds like an answer from 5 years ago, the cloud. The reason I'm saying that is still in the future is that most people are still not doing this. We're certainly seeing a lot of public sector organizations, certainly. They still have the 5-year-old, 10-year-old mentality that we can't put it up there because of security. Okay, I'm not a security specialist. I have security specialists that I've spoken to who have told me that's an utterly bizarre point of view, because it's much easier to crack into their data warehouses on site, their data centers, and ultimately it's just someone else's computer. So I think moving to the cloud is where it's going to go, and I think you're going to move towards, instead of an 80-20 in favor of local data storage, I think that's going to shift in terms of 80-20 to cloud. That's where it's going. The cloud offerings are becoming more efficient. We're seeing embedded analytics within cloud storage. It's no longer just a big hard drive sitting somewhere. We're seeing more offerings. We're seeing things like Snowflake breaking through, which is a really impressive platform. But also we're seeing improved network speeds, which gives us faster connectivity to remote data sources, large data to be transferred over networks. So that if we see the increase in network speeds the way it's going, then we're going to be seeing everything shifting up to the cloud. I know that's a boring answer, but we're still not there. We're still sitting with people having a server room with a lot of fans going, and that to me is just very 90s. Everything's going to shift to the cloud. Embedded analytics, one-stop shops with neat things that are going to be pulling multiple data sources together in an automated way. That's kind of where we're pushing things. I can also see a lot of business decisions being made automatically using ML. But at the minute, we need to do efficient ML and make those algorithms useful. We need huge data sources, huge data coming in from multiple sources constantly. Having one ERP system and then going and doing analysis on that is very isolated. It's very standalone. It's just what happens to be in your nominal ledger. It's not really going to give you much interesting insights. So I think that's where we're going. Cloud-based embedded analytics with all of your data sources talking to each other automatically.
Yeah, it's almost like the computers becoming networked, isn't it? So your computer's becoming decentralized, right? So you get the computers sit and just like the data sitting everywhere, and it becomes one big version of what you've got sitting on your desk. And I suppose one thought that just that I was thinking about when you're talking about that is almost like the environmental impact of that as well. So there's been a lot played around Bitcoin and the cost of generating Bitcoin. The same will be true, and I mean they're created in server farms as well. Do you think that will come back as well, just in terms of like the cost of cloud storage and cloud processing, because it is sort of sitting on the other side of the world?
Yeah.
I don't have to think about it because it's sort of just something I access remotely. It doesn't affect my day to day, so I'm not as aware of things. Do you think that will become a bit of a theme?
Yes, and I think it is now. And unfortunately, it's really out of my sphere of expertise. But yeah, you're right. I mean, the simple fact of the amount of energy that is being burned to keep these networks alive is going to be environmentally impactful. But there's a necessity there, and necessity drives invention. So I think that needs to improve, because it's going to come to a point where we don't have an option. We need to do something better, or we switch off Google.
Yeah, I'm sure there's an argument around doing the extra analytics. Healthcare providers find better solutions or healthcare products for customers versus watching the latest series on streaming, as an example. So I think streaming takes a huge amount of bandwidth and processing power just in itself, right? And we're all guilty of that.
Yeah, it does, but we're also seeing a complete shift in the dynamic of working. This is one thing we have spoken about in the past. The ability to work remotely, and if that is fully embraced globally, mass transit systems, the whole sort of commute, all of these things that people flying to London and back in a day, these kind of things should be a thing of the past, because there's no real need for that. We set up, when Bulien became a thing, we'd committed to working from home. Now, that would not have been possible 10 years ago. It would have been possible for some, but not on a mass scale that we're now seeing. And I can see we were working from home right from the beginning, because we're a tech company, and we don't see the need. I've seen all of the arguments. Most of the arguments seem to be from people who are either affiliated with or own large properties for commercial purposes. So yeah, everyone needs to go back to work. The office is still alive. The office is not dead. Get back to work, because otherwise I lose my rent. I don't think that is a valid argument. I think you've just maybe invested in something that has been a victim of, has fallen by the wayside during a shift in the paradigm. So that happens all the time. Some people invested in Blockbuster Video. Unfortunately, that just happens. I think the whole, there is the flip side of this, reducing the amount of time people are commuting, reducing the global mass transit systems for work and all of that, which don't really need to exist. That is a flip side. That could be balancing out that kind of thing. I don't know. It's not my area of expertise, but there are mass benefits to the internet, as we know, despite the bad press it gets.
In terms of like working from home, how have you found that? I mean, that's been pretty seamless then from your point of view.
Absolutely. We're constantly like this. So we're talking now from different areas of the country. We're constantly on Teams or whatever platform, the platforms are available. So we're constantly talking on these things all the time. We dip in and out, exactly the same as if I was walking up and saying hi to my other colleagues on the other side of the building. And then we meet regularly. So we'll meet at the pub, we'll meet for a hike, we'll go for a meal, whatever it happens to be. Because I've heard a lot of people saying, oh, well, it's a social thing. So yeah, I mean, I believe it is, but so that we have a really good relationship. I'm saying me and our team. That seems to have been utterly seamless, working from home. We're also seeing people just working on their own time. I've said this before as well. I hire adults. I've seen so many people saying, oh, well, they're more productive if I'm watching them and I get them, I need them logged on, I need a camera on them. I've never understood that mentality. I think hire adults who are responsible and do their own work, and judge them on their output. If they want to do that from sitting in a nice field and enjoying the weather, I don't care. Why should I care? If they have X to do and they do X, they've done a fantastic job. If they did X from a pub, great.
It's definitely been an interesting journey we've been on, and definitely a new world that we're getting into. I think
Yes.
Be interesting to see how it sort of pans out, really.
Yes, this is very exciting. This is the start of a new revolution.
Well, Chris, thanks very much for your time. I really appreciate it. Some really interesting concepts there, and to think about sort of where we're going in the future as well, and also just the reality around some things that can be done today as well, which I think is also quite interesting, because I think definitely a paradigm shift and a change of thinking that's been going on. I think it's just becoming more and more visible, I think, because it's been fascinating. So
Yeah.
Chris, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me. I really enjoyed it.